Calling all pitchers and pitching coaches, PitchDoc 2024 is your destination for revolutionary pitching education and information, from the newest technology to advances in biomechanics knowledge to take-home strategies and application for making your pitchers better today. Join us August 8th and 9th at the Westin O'Hare in Chicago. Experience transformative sessions led by leaders from the college game to technology companies to player development experts. Use promo code OGX Podcast to take an extra 10% off. Visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc. Again, visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc and use code OGX Podcast to take an additional 10% off. Spots are limited, so secure yours today. Hi, guys. Another great episode today. We are talking about the business case for women's softball. Obviously, a meaty topic that we only can briefly touch on, but a lot of good discussion around what's the business case for getting into softball if I'm a tech company or a pro league? What should it look like? Some of the conversations we've had around that and our frustrations about sort of lack of investment leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So love that topic. We then touched on Michigan's rise and, awesome show that they've had in the Big Ten, specifically a little bit about Lauren Durkowski, who has worked with us. And we're just so proud of watching her just be an incredible leader and incredible force in the circle. And then finally, we answered our question today. We had Natalie Ruechel, who talked about just what is the up and coming thing in softball pitching. So had a great topic about that. I think you're really going to like today's episode. So listen in. And as always, subscribe, follow, share, anything you can do to help us. All right, back yet again for another OGX podcast. We got some good topics, I think, today, and I'm excited for our question also. I said last week that the question was the hardest one, but I don't know, this one, it might be a little tougher, so stay tuned for that question. We were going to start, and I'll give a little backstory to our listeners of, some general where this came from, but I think a common... And we've talked about this in other settings in different ways, but a common thing we tend to see is that whether it's a tech company, an investor, a equipment company, like I think there's a variety of things that when they are thinking about engaging with softball, a lot of times our conversations almost come across as them saying like, prove that this is financially viable. What is why should I come into this? Or what we see is they come into it thinking just like, well, it's an add-on, maybe it's going to give me a little bit of money or things like that. And so, in particular this week, I got asked from a very high up person in a tech company. We were talking about softball, and the question I got asked was why girls play softball if they can't go pro. And I think I responded kind of like I am right now, which was a little confused by the question. But I think basically what I'm interested in us talking about is like the business case for softball. So I think this kind of conversation of, I think the business case for women's sports is a podcast that I listen to. And I like that concept of there's a real business here. There's, this is not just like out of the kindness of your heart come into softball. And I think it's kind of frustrating when people don't see that. So I thought we could just chat a little bit on this. Just to kick off, my answer initially was to stare blankly at that person. But then my first issue for the sports question is just confusing of lots and lots of people play lots of sports without thinking that they're going to go professional. So that's confusing. There is a professional women's league. There are two of them. So that's confusing. And then I think the last thing that we eventually got to was that in many universities, softball in its current state right now is a revenue generating sport for that university. And so there's just not truth to this idea that like there is no potential for things like that. And the athletes right now are able to get some of that even if they don't go professional through NILs and things like that. So that's my like initial take, but happy to kick it off to either of you for some thoughts on what is the business case for softball, I guess, if I'm a business thinking about coming into this space.
Who's first? Me? Okay. Yeah, I think where this comes from is this idea of like a lot of these tech companies, they're in the baseball space and they're in the golf space, for example, right? And so, golf is an interesting sport, not only obviously because of it, it's of the ways in which the avenues in which you can play professionally, but you can stay in the game of golf for a really long time, obviously. Right. And then baseball, and there's MLB. And so I think just like when it's seen as like that it is compared to the two of them, I think what's like really important is to not compare it to the two of them, because when you're looking at, well, this is what the MLB has, and this is all the money and the revenue that we see in MLB.
Right. And MLB, which has been invested in and around for
exactly
30 it's just years. Like what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's not, it is not, that is not the comparison. And it's like,
it's a false equivalency.
Yeah. And so that is really where I think this like idea comes from. It's not that they're saying like, it's not a good game. It's not, nobody likes it. It's just from this like very specific comparison to, in my mind, definitely the MLB. And then for the tech companies, I do think a lot of it comes from the golf side. So I think what the argument and the conversations that we are often having with these individuals is like, because you have to be able to, in order to get it to this place, you have to be willing to be a player in that space. Like there is the interest. We know that people show up. In order to elevate it, the reason why it doesn't have the platforms, the reason why it maybe doesn't have the build out professional level like we see in some other games, is because the lack of investment. And so it's like this weird cycle. We know that this is a game, obviously, at the youth level, at the college level, that generates a lot of revenue, that people love, that is incredibly, from a spectator standpoint, like think about just like seeing games in postseason on TV. Like when we were growing up, we saw nothing, right? And now it's just unbelievable when postseason is on and you walk into any restaurant, any bar, what people want to watch is the Women's College World Series. They want to watch super regionals. I mean, this is a game that I think it gets so frustrating for us because we know obviously there is growth as far as people's passion and interest at the highest levels. And so this means leaning in from an investment standpoint, not depriving athletes at that level of resources and technology and data, lean into them. And then at the youth levels, where maybe it's not so much about this spectator sport, but the amount of money at the youth level is like a conversation and probably an episode all of its own. So it's like literally simply untrue. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's just in looking at it as, well, it's not baseball. So if you're looking at it as it's got to be the equivalent, then it's just not there. It's a totally different business approach. It is a totally different business approach. It's a totally different mindset. And I think for some reason where we get frustrated is that like, it feels as if these individuals we're referring to, like they can't see that. They think they take the same approach, the same outlets, the same business plan they do in baseball and just try to apply it. It's like, well, that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting. We're specifically kind of talking about tech companies, so I'll sit on that for a second, but I think there's lots of different avenues that this is applicable. In baseball, the way that market is growing is through media. Mm-hmm. It's not because the market is becoming bigger, that there are more fans. It's that they are able, and the way they're trying to capitalize and the way the owners have increased value is media rights. So whether that's, we charge for you to watch our games, whether that's betting, like there's a variety of ways that like the media surrounding the event has increased the value of an MLB team, for instance. That doesn't help a tech company. Like when we're talking tech, I'm training. So tech that has to do with betting or things maybe, but like a tech company that has to do with the training tools, that doesn't help with training. So there's also in baseball, like you've tapped into it. You've tapped into the market. You might find a little bit of different ways, but like you've tapped. My business case for softball specifically is that this is a startup. You haven't remotely touched the surface of the revenue that you can generate here. So why wouldn't you want to come into this market where you have infinite potential. It's yes, baseball right away, you're going to have more potential maybe, but that's it. That's the end of the market. The reason that market isn't continuing to grow is, like I said, it's the reason we want to pay Ohtani billions of dollars is because people want to buy Ohtani shirts and it can help us with media. It's not because then the Dodgers are going to go spend more money on the training tech or whatever. Like that doesn't, that's not the reason for it. Versus softball and women's sports generally, like we've barely scratched the surface. So there's such a growth potential that you could be tapping into. Like it's the fastest growing, some of the fastest growing revenue generating things out there. I don't get that. If you can just shift the way you see it. I don't get this idea of like not going into that, but to do it, as you're saying, Ash, like you have to invest in it. I mean, the women's basketball is such a ridiculous example of like 3 years ago, they had like a dumbbell and were like not even allowed to be called, whatever, they had a different name and they weren't even allowed to say March Madness. It was at a different time. And all you had to do was like, boop, change the time that the games were on, give them a little more platform. And like, it's blew up immensely. And one of the things I said to this person, those same personalities exist in softball. So you give them a platform. Women's sports, you've almost as women, we've had to become personalities to generate revenue, to get brands. Like you've had to approach the sport differently. And so you get these big personalities and people like that. And so the sport also, like it can grow when you give these personalities like a Caitlin Clark, like an Angel Reese on that side. On our side, like a Kinsey Hansen, like you can think of lots of these like personalities. You give them these platforms and people want to follow it. They want to watch that. So I just don't, that's the other avenue of like, instead of trying to keep finding ways to tap into the market in these incremental basis, women's sports also offers you this opportunity to get in at the ground when it's just like shooting up. And so I think like, but you had to be there. You had to be talking to these people. You had to be listening to them. You have to give, them the things they need. And the unwillingness to do that is very frustrating. That's just like, well, but like, why do people even play softball?
Well, and you have to, I would say, like, you have to have some skin in the game because, like, where we have really been frustrated in the past with some of the tech companies and where we've inserted ourselves to take responsibility is you just took the product you developed for baseball and then you just like changed the color of the ball and a couple algorithms and then shifted it on your way, So it's like
pink it. We've said it before. What was it? Pink it and shrink it.
Pink it and shrink it. Love it. Like one of my favorite phrases.
Right. And so like, that's not any skin in the game. You did not show anyone that you understand what's happening in the game, what matters. It is not equivalent to the baseball side. And so if like, if the data is wrong, if it doesn't account for an underhand motion, whatever type of tech that we're talking about, and it spits out just ridiculous information because it's like, oh yeah, well, we haven't figured that out. Well, then it shouldn't be a product. Right. And so I think what we really have found we found ourselves in the position of like, then we're going to get our hands on all of that and then like expose the hell out of it, because that's the stuff that I think when people think of like, oh yeah, that's investing. We do have a product for softball. It's like, yeah, but it's shitty. And so if it's shitty, then no one wants it. And if no one wants it, then you're like, but see, no one wants it. So it's like this weird cycle. And I think that's really what we have seen from our perspective.
I was going to say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you build brand loyalty in softball by having a product that a player uses, finds value, trusts it, and then uses it as a coach. It's different from the MLB model where you are trying to sell your product to an entire team. You're trying to convince an organization that your product is valuable. That's not the softball market. The softball market is attaching to yes teams and yes selling to a college team or at the professional level, but it is attaching brand loyalty to an individual athlete, a coach, a player development company that will sing your company's praises because you are actually thoughtful about your applications in the softball space. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't do that, and therefore nobody builds brand loyalty to any of your products, and then you throw your hands in the air and you say, well, softball's not a market. And it's like, you just shot yourself in the foot, essentially, trying to create a market and approaching it and trying to infuse it at an equivalency of the MLB at the college level, which isn't a direct, it's a false equivalency, right? And you've created this, as you said, like cycle of like, well, it didn't work because nobody wanted to, buy this at the college level. It's like, that's actually not, it's got to work its way up there. And brand loyalty starts with the athletes and the coaches and the people that train those athletes. It's different from going to an MLB organization with lots and lots of money and saying, buy this product from me, or from us, for our organization. It's an individual athlete model. That's an infusion that exists, and it is untapped, and it's anyone's game in terms of infusion into that market. And it's mind blowing how much they just shoot themselves in the foot of just not investing in it in that way. Time and energy, thoughtfulness.
Yeah. I think this, to pivot just a little bit more into the like business case and away from the tech companies, I think these same frustrations do exist, for me at least, at the professional game, which is like, as we're trying to grow the professional game, kind of holding those stakeholders to the same standards, which is like, actually invest in this. So what we can't have is high level athletes not having the resources, the funds, the backing to train at the highest level at that thing. And then you put out something, and like, I think last year at the beginning of some of the professional leagues, there was like 18 runs a game and like all of these things. But it's like, well, we didn't give these women opportunities to be at their best. And so one thing, we really try to give pro athletes an opportunity not to come in from our standpoint and be like, pay us, a bunch of money to train. We know that's not a space that they're able to do that, but let's help build the game in that way too. Let's help see some of these athletes who are at their prime, who get shut down sometimes. Like, let's give them an opportunity to train and to be on that stage and to watch the game continue to soar when we give them those opportunities. So I think there's lots of places like this in women's sports where it's just like, well, the professional game isn't that good. And it's like, you just always keep cycling back. Yeah, but we aren't investing in the same. That woman had to go have a full 9-to-5 job in order to do that, so she didn't have time to train. And then you put her on the stage, and then you told her like she wasn't performing good enough. And then we keep having these cycles. And obviously, I think NIL, it has there's challenges to it for sure, and they got to figure all of it out. But it's been very powerful for women athletes. I think this ability to monetize yourself and to show that there's a real draw to monetizing these athletes. And I think we'll continue to see that in softball as well. And so that will help. But I would just say, like, not true. That's in conclusion, not true. Women and softball is a huge market. Invest, come join us, come to the events, like put some skin in the game and see what happens for you.
Teams are setting season attendance records, game attendance records, like
constantly. Right.
Constantly. It's happened multiple times already.
People said at a 4-hour game last night, midweek. I watched on TV. So
right. It's not that there's not eyes, that's for sure.
Yeah. It's gotta tap into it, invest, be willing to be at the, be at the table. So all right. I'm sure we'll come back to this, but we'll stop it there for now. Our next topic that we wanted to chat on a little bit is Michigan. So I think obviously last year was historic for them, probably in a way they would like to forget, and they didn't make the postseason. And this year, I think maybe I can't remember the exact record they started, but maybe started a little slow as they came into the season. But I believe they have 4 losses. They're right at the top with Northwestern of the Big Ten, and have won a lot. Have either swept or won the recent series. So just chatting a little bit. Obviously, we've had the privilege of working with some of their staff, working with Lauren Durkowski the past few summers, and she's been a critical part of that. So just kind of getting our thoughts on that. I guess maybe I'll just kick with like their hitting seems to be much different. I know that they were, they have Chitty on staff, and I know Faith's been doing a lot of work with that. So just getting some real work into what it looks like to be an offensive minded team. Obviously that I think as this back half of the season has come, they've been really tapping into that and scoring a lot of runs. But maybe touching a little bit on Lauren Durkowski's climb. She's a big part in this last series against Penn State. I think in most series, she's a big part of their success. So maybe just touching a little bit on that.
Yeah. I think I'm really proud of Lauren, and I guess it's 2 years ago when she first started here, and she was in a space where I think she just felt like she was not, I don't know, like didn't quite feel like she was maximizing who she was, what she had. That is when Coach Jen Brudges recommended that she come to see us. She's obviously from the Chicago area, so it was kind of easy for her to connect. And I remember that first summer, because anytime we get college athletes who their coaches send them, they walk in like, the hell is this place? Like there's some reservation of like, okay, just another pitching coach going to tell me their way and their style. And that's certainly not what she verbalized to me, but that, there's this like sense of like, they're not totally comfortable. And I definitely got that from Dirk that first day. And I always just, ask any of our athletes, but I remember vividly in that conversation talking to her about just bring your full self here, ask questions, be willing to, I don't know, don't just march because we say to do something. If you don't like something, say it. I felt like, I really tried to give her permission in that first day. Like, you don't have to do everything we say, but I want you to know why we're making suggestions, and I want you to really dig in. So she left that first day, and I remember thinking like, oh man, I really hope we can get some buy-in from her. And were using data, but not to the extent, obviously, that we were able to show her some stuff. And then I had a follow-up. She was living in Ann Arbor that summer, and I had a follow-up call with her a few weeks later, and I got off that call like, I don't even know who that person was. Like, she had a level of comfort, was telling me about what was going on, was like, I need to FaceTime you next week because I need to see what's going, like something's going on with my Rapsodo. She was, carrying that Rapsodo down to throw on her own, and asked for a meet. I think one time I said, like, let's talk about collect this, and this, and we'll sit down and we'll go through your data next week. And she messaged me like, basically, you said next week, it's next week. Where's our call? And I was like, yeah, this is good. So I just felt this shift in her. I mean, it was so obvious to me, like, she's a great pitcher. She came with great stuff. This isn't like she had nothing and then we grew. Like, she came with really good stuff. She's a competitor. She's such a great athlete. But there was just this shift in her, I think, in wanting to push for more, wanting to know more. And it makes a difference. It just makes a difference when an athlete decides somewhere along the line to stop just following what people tell them to, which I think is just how we kind of breed athletes at the youth level. Certainly not like a Michigan thing. It's just like what we do in travel ball, high school, whatever. And there was just this shift where she just I don't know, became very mature in her own process. And I think about that fall, again, it's maybe 2 years ago, and Jen Brunges and I, in my mind, we have a great relationship, and I just really, it kind of sounds like I say this about all the coaches that you asked me about. We like Duke and such, but there is such a similar connection, and I have similar feedback from all of them. I just have so much respect for Jen because she is such a learner. I think about when we did our very initial pitching foundations course, she joined virtually, I think Bonnie or Hutch one time said, every time I go in the office, she's watching things and scribbling notes. And I just think I just have so much respect for coaches who have had so much success in the game as an athlete, as a coach, and just refuse to stop learning. We have great conversations. She deserves so much credit for the culture of pushing people to learn, being an example of that. And so when we connected that fall, she said, I feel like she's a different kid. I'm like, I felt that way too, but I don't know her like you know her. But I felt from who I met early in the summer to late in the summer, and she's just a different kid. And I just, we've had the opportunity, obviously she came back last summer, and I don't know, she's smart. Dirk is smart. She is resilient. She is a hungry kid. She's excellent. And I think she's excellent, not just because of her tools. She just embodies a lot of things that the reason why we have been, so thrilled to have her work with us, is I really feel like some athletes, they're just like player development kids. They're just like, they need this process. They need all the information to get in charge and to like take hold of their careers. And she's done that. And I'm always so excited to see her come back over the summer. And like, she's just, I don't know, she's changed a lot in the short 2 years that I feel like we've known her. And I just love to watch her and follow her and see that success, because it's not an accident. This isn't just like, oh, she's gifted, she has tools. There's some underlying stuff. There's some underlying digging there with her. The whole staff. We had the opportunity to work with the whole pitching staff last summer, and that's just a testament. Like anytime, Jen is saying like, this is what I think how you should spend your summer, and they all buy in and individually make that choice to train with us all summer long. There's a culture there that's like, we don't stop growing. We don't stop learning. We don't stop figuring out how to maximize who we are, what we can do, and how we beat people. And it's amazing. And I give them so much credit. I have a lot of admiration for Jen, Dirk, all of their pitchers, and just that culture as a whole. And I'm speaking on the pitching side, but my assumption is that that's like infiltrating throughout the team. I assume there was a major adjustment losing Hutch, because how could there not be? Like losing something like that is like, that runs deep, I assume, obviously. And so maybe there was just an adjustment period. And they had to sort of like reset what new culture is. But from the pitching side, it's pretty clear to me why that's a successful staff. And I'm here for it. And I'm excited for them. I'm proud of them.
Yeah. One thing I noticed different about Dirk last summer, even from her first summer, was just like she talked a lot more like a leader. And was sort of like ready to build that culture, which I think is something just that's been so clear about Michigan always. And obviously, as they've had some shifts the past year, 2 years, that they've been able to still instill this. There's like a loyalty to the university, to the program. That circle is heavy. Like there's some big people that have pitched at Michigan and carried that team. And it's always been something that's like, we have this type of pitching and, these great stars. And I think, wanting to kind of like take that burden on can be a little heavy, I think. But I think there's something like, one, she just spoke much more like a leader, but there's a different way that when you're like, when you're a Michigan leader, that you just like speak with it's about like the university, what's come before you. And that's very clearly instilled in those athletes in a really like powerful way, I think. And so it seems very clear to me that like you could like rally the troops easier of like, all right, we had an adjustment period, but like it's time to get back to Michigan softball. And they've been able to accomplish that, I think. And their athletes speak like that. It's not like it definitely comes across from everyone, which I think is so powerful and unique, with all the challenges of what the game looks like now and the individuality and, some of the maybe like hard things of NIL type things and the transfer portal. And there's just a buy-in to the culture and the name across your chest and what came before you. And I think that's really powerful and seems to like get them to rally around that, which I think is really
what
cool.
story I was just thinking of also, Krista, when we were moving into the facility we're in now, which was like, a time we'd like to all forget because we did a lot of the moving ourselves and it was unbearable. But when I don't know what like triggered Bonnie to think like I need more plyos, but she's like, we need more plyos. And we're basically like, where are the plyos? Because like at this point our facility was like, in shambles. And we were like finding them underneath of, God knows what other equipment, packing them up and like meeting Kiki Thole, who also lives here, like down the highway to like, I think we sent Jordan, obviously, who worked for us at the time, like, go take these box of plyos and meet her at the Menards parking lot. And give them this. So it's pretty, I don't know why that story is kind of funny, but I just think like it's also just a good one. I just like that story. I'm just like, we need these now. We've got to make sure Kiki's going to be there. But I think there's just like this overarching sense of like, I don't know, digging into like, what more do we want? What more do we need? Let's keep pushing forward. Like, I don't know. I think that story is not only like kind of silly and funny, but just a good representation of like their commitments to keep pushing to get better and to like keeping up with the types of things they know they need. Like, well, we can't go into the season without another 6 set of plyos.
Mm-hmm.
So Kiki, go to Menards or wherever the hell we met her in the parking lot to get those boxes, Yeah, I like that. It's like a little, like, I don't know, like a little gritty. It's like a little blue collar gritty, but like pushing to something about that whole
The story
culture
I thought
really
you were going to tell was when we went to a conference that Hutch spoke at, and she was like, basically like, we were playing like shit, and I was looking around like, what's the problem? And I looked in the locker room and it was a mess. And she was like, anyways, she was basically like, we don't have enough like pride in what we're doing. So we cleaned the locker room, and that really turned my season around. First, I was like, wow, I didn't know I just had to have my athletes clean. But also, it was like a very, I think that just, there's this sense of like pride and not forgetting where, both, I think this combination, as we were saying, this like learning, looking forward, how are we going to grow? How are we going to tap into more? But don't forget, the jersey, the name across your chest, the people who came before you. You had this legendary coach for so long. You had all of these. So I think that combination is really incredible. And so not surprising.
I still have I'm going to date myself here, but 20 plus years ago, Michigan kicked our asses in the first round of the regionals in Ann Arbor. And I still have the same feeling of like the awe that I had walking on that campus, seeing a campus like that as a lowly sophomore, seeing a campus like that, seeing a field like that, seeing the investment in the resources and knowing the caliber of Michigan athletics in general. I still feel that way. Like I would still feel that way, that awe. And I still feel like the athletes that we get to interact with directly are a reflection of that. I still feel that way 20 plus years later about the brand of Michigan softball. And it's a cool feeling. It's like, I would just feel the exact same way walking on campus 20 years later, it's a brand and it's a great brand.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Time for our question. We have Natalie Ruechel today. She is the pitching coach at App State. We've known her for a while, I think probably in a couple different roles over the past few years. She's been always learning, always growing. And so, as I mentioned, I thought last week's question was the hardest, but we'll see what people think. But I think this one's, she's really given us a doozy. So I'm going to play it in a second here.
Hi, my name is Natalie Ruechel, and I'm the pitching coach at Appalachian State University. We're starting to see more and more elite coaches and programs making changes to their training philosophies in the last several years due to more research and data within our game. Coaches are consulting with outside companies to enhance player development. They're managing workload differently. They're using data and technology to enhance the recruiting process and building and utilizing a staff differently than we've seen in past years.
Uh-oh. Hold, please.
I was like, I'm with her so far.
Hold on. See where we were.
Differently than we've seen in past years. My question for you guys today is, what's the next biggest breakthrough for pitching as far as technology, training, and staff composition?
Pitching. Dang, I forgot I picked the pitching one.
Talking about a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. I thought it was more general. That's okay. Just kidding.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I like it.
I think I
talked
know
about this yesterday in our full team meeting a little bit. Like I think
I know Ashley's answer, but I absolutely want to hear it.
Okay. One, way to go, Natalie, because that was a rock star.
Ruechel, so sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know how to say it. Yeah.
I've always liked Natalie. She is smart. She is like energetic and passionate. She's just all the right combination of variables that I think like you just want to be around her. I would send any of our athletes to her. So I think that question embodies that, like how thoughtful and that she was in that question. All right. So I think this is a tough one. This is definitely a tough one. And I think there's a variety of places that you could take this. When she says like, what are the new things? My first thing is that when it comes to new, I'm obviously reflecting on the type of work that we're getting into and the type of things that I think are information we don't yet have. So the first thing that sparks my brain is the work that we're doing in the UNO lab. This is a motion capture lab where we worked for a really long time to make sure that it was designed appropriately with how many force plates, where the force plates are located, what variables we need to be looking at. And we are just now kind of like getting the benefits of that data where we're starting to see that come through. And this is key because what I think that, when Natalie mentions things like workload and doing this, to me, this idea of efficiency in the motion is at the root of so much. So the motion has been misunderstood for so long because we don't have the research. And yes, there are some things out there, but it's not in the totality at which we're looking at the motion now. And there have been so many comparisons, bringing this conversation full circle to just what it is and isn't compared to the overhand. It's not a comparison. There is no what it is and what it isn't compared to overhand. It is a totally unique movement. And because of that, because we've misunderstood it, issues we have with workload, pain culture, having pitchers who have a certain performance level and they can't sustain it, thinking that we can tell a pitcher, okay, you have this profile, and so this is who you are, not understanding that with the workload we have in our game and maybe how fatigue weighs on her body position, ultimately her arm slot, how that impacts her profile, her break profile, her velocity, not really understanding that connection, to me is like, once we do, it opens up how we actually how we make decisions about pitchers. Even to know, okay, this pitcher has this, she's got up, she's got down, she's got all this variability. So right now we're in a space in our game where we say like, okay, she's got this, so that's my like stud. Now I just need to build around her. But what if that stud has really, really low efficiency in her movements, meaning her patterns are brutal. So yes, her arm action taps into XYZ. Yes, she can do it at 68 plus, but this is not an athlete that's going to be able to throw game 1 and game 3 in a series because of that level of efficiency. To me, truly understanding and being able to like quantify easily, not just take someone's opinion of whether or not someone has good patterns, not just being able to say like, well, she's good. So just because she's good, like all the time on TV, someone who's a great pitcher, sometimes the announcers will be like, take a look at the way she does X. And in my mind, sometimes I'm like, do not take a look at the way she does X, like not in a way to mimic it. Not saying that it's, she shouldn't do those things. She may have to do those things. That's how she's producing what she does, but it impacts how she gets worn down. And that's really what efficiency is. How much can they like withstand? So to me, the first thing that I thought of is when we really understand this connection to how energy leaks, has many more opportunities to leak out of the underhand motion than it does the overhand motion. We have workload that is out of control. Ball flight is 100% influenced by fatigue, the wearing down of the body. And we've got to understand how to like measure who is more susceptible to that, who can withstand certain workload and who can't, regardless of how good their stuff is. So that is something for me that I think work that we're doing that I think is just huge. Obviously, on the ball flight front, I would shift into things like it being visible with in-game data. We've talked about this before. Yeah, I think the visibility of in-game data, and I'll let you guys then, if that's also part of your answer, is really, really big. This is now where we're going to start to understand what are people actually doing? What does it look like to be great? There's this pitcher up against this pitcher. It's a 1-1 ball game, and she is totally different than this pitcher. So my mind went to those two spaces. Ball flight wise, it's about in-game. It's about visibility. It's about having honest conversations. There's real versus feel, but until we know what's real, we're going to constantly be leading pitchers and training them in a route that doesn't match up to what we actually need from them later in their career. So that's my ball flight answer. I'll let you guys expand upon that because I know that was sort of in your head as well. But from the standpoint of really getting workload right, of really understanding like matchups and who should go where with the amount of workload we take, to me, efficiency has to be in the story. And like, what is efficiency? How would you be able to note that? That's work that I feel like once we really hammer that out and help to hammer that out through the work we're doing with UNO, it's going to have major implications on the game. And I'm excited about it. I can't wait.
Yeah. I think with that, I don't know that my answer is different, except I was thinking more of in-game data. It's just getting all of this out. It doesn't do any, obviously we are capturing in-game data now. in many stadiums. But this, like, that only those schools are holding on to that, or they only have to share it when they play each other, is not helping the game in the way that it could. So I think the next sort of like big thing, if we really want to see pitching continue to grow and change and develop, is democratizing that data, get it out, let people know. You know, yesterday I watched the Florida State game, and in the 8th inning, whenever Rothrock got put back in, the announcer said, you know, this is why you have to condition, to make sure you're ready for XYZ. And I thought, like, oh man, it would be so great if we could go into a StatCast like thing and see how her ball flight changed, because she was still throwing 68, 67, but I'm sure her break changed significantly by the time she got fatigued. And it's not about conditioning. I'm sure that kid is very conditioned. And I just think, like, being able to start having conversations like that, being able to understand what actually works, and that people see that. So we're not just saying, like, it works when you can go up. Well, what does that mean? You have to go up at what speed, with what break? Like, what do these things mean? You have to have down at what? And we've been able to infer a lot. Nate Walker's done a lot of work inferring based on, like, what we know to be true, and those pitchers that are having success. Now that we, you know, some of us can see some of the in-game data, we can infer these things and see these things happening in game. But where baseball player development, I say this all the time, but like, where it actually made the turn in the direction that we're talking about is when StatCast came out, when all that data, like, I can go up right now on any, you know, I said Ohtani earlier, I can open StatCast, open Ohtani's profile, and see every pitch he's ever thrown, where it's gone, what the break has been, what pitches he hits, the heat map, the cold map. And like we're scared of that in the game, but these people who, like, this is, you know, like, it just doesn't make sense. And that then is where I can then take that conversation, not to say, like, be Ohtani, but here are the types of things that work in the game. Here's what works. Here's what doesn't work. When you started getting hit in the game, this is exactly why you started getting hit in the game. Your break profile changed from X to Y. Okay, now let's explore why it did that. That would then open the conversation of workload and things like that. And I think the same goes for the UNO data, which we're really trying, is like, that data has to be out. Like, it can't just be sitting in a lab somewhere. So it's continuing to get this information out. It's just like, yes, maybe for a minute it gives you a competitive edge to have it and hold on to it and hold tight to it, but not really. And it doesn't help the game grow. And I just think, like, so to me, it's that our in-game data is in a space, and maybe it starts aggregated if we're worried about, or anonymous or blind or whatever it needs to be, but that we can at least see, you know, that type of thing. I will say, just to asterisk, come to Pitch Doc. We will be doing some of this. So we are going to show some of this data in a way, at least, you know, anonymous for now, but sort of like what works and what doesn't, and those type of things. But I think that's it. And until we can speak in a way that's not, it still sounds like opinion when we're saying, like, try to add 2 inches of break on your pitch. It's like, why? Well, if we can really show that that's a big difference, then, you know, we start to just change the conversation. So that was where my brain went.
My answer is around stress management, 100%. My answer is around the understanding, which I think we have had such a huge hand in building this sort of culture of, you know, pitching is incredibly stressful to the body, incredibly stressful, and understanding the role of strength and conditioning, and the way conversations have changed, I think, with a lot of our college partners and the people that we consult with, of like holding strength and conditioning accountable, not letting it sit in a silo, not accounting for all of the stressors that a pitcher experiences. And I think the other side of that, and maybe it'll show up sooner than I think it will, is the recruiting landscape changing for pitching by valuing organizations, coaches, athletes themselves who put their health first, right? Because an unhealthy player is an unavailable player. Someone who is injured is not someone who can go in and perform for you. And so I think this landscape of, okay, the hardest thrower at 16U, great. She's got the velocity, maybe she has the break, but where does her health sit? It's this other layer of the conversation that, one, don't shy away from it. Don't hide it. Don't, injuries happen. We can't prevent every single injury that happens to any athlete, but there are a lot of things. Actually, you said this yesterday, and it's perfect. there are so many injury concepts in softball that are incredibly insidious. They build up over time. They are, sure, the acute stuff happens, the accidents happen, the collisions at first base, home plate, all that. But for pitchers especially, I don't like the word preventable. You guys know that. But there are a lot of places in the injury space and workload and stress management that we do not yet do a good service for pitchers. And getting coaches to understand the stress continuum and their role in helping to manage that for their pitchers. But I think the whole other side of that is the positive reinforcement in the recruiting landscape, is the conversations around health in the recruiting landscape, not hiding a previous injury from coaches who are, seeing you. It's not a blemish. It's a part of the game, and it has to be handled and it has to be thoughtful. And so I think prioritizing that it's a shift that I hope, takes hold soon, where, the recruiting world starts to value the health of a player and rebounding from injury and, managing herself and her own stress. Because to me, that is, that's the true nature of player development, is when they can own that themselves and be able to know their own story and manage that themselves.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, Laura, like all the talk we've been, like the podcast that Riker and I did for Redefine the Circle about athlete management, this concept of like data, right. Technically Natalie's question was like just about data. She's like tech right. and or data. Mm-hmm. And like data is not always just ball flight data. It's not always just biomechanics, right? Like when we talk about managing athlete data, we also talk about managing, their wellness questionnaires.
Reports of pain, yeah, right.
Reports of pain, yes. Things, injury history. Like, I think that's an interesting spin and like answer to that question of just understanding the totality of data. So when you're going after performance, when you say like living in a silo, understanding like how overarching the concept of data really is. So yeah, I think that's kind of like what triggered my brain. Your take on that triggered mind of like, that's why we obviously value our management system so well, because what data means is a lot larger than maybe just like it's tech, it's a piece of hardware you put down, you collect something and it gets data. That's data too. But there's data outside of that, of course. Yeah.
I think it's really recognizing, you said, I love the totality of data and the different types of data, but recognizing the human story that it tells, right? When she's fatigued, when she's on her period, when she's just not mentally performing well. We always say they're not robots. Athletes aren't robots. And so using data to, support your coaching art and make your decisions faster, more efficient, more effective. That to me is like, that's the ultimate management of the athlete, is when that data supports your coaching decisions. The athlete buy, you talked about Durkowski, the athlete buy-in, and then they become so invested in taking care of themselves. And you said like not marching to orders, right? And I think the stress management conversation and the role of strength and conditioning, especially in pitchers and softball in general, it's becoming something you can't ignore. You can't ignore it, because it has led to mismanagement of stress, especially at the younger levels, has led to a shrinking pool of pitchers. And so I hope, again, from the recruiting landscape, that we put that carrot on the stick and say, I'm glad that you're a great performer now. Can you sustain, right? Can you sustain beyond your freshman year on my campus, knowing the resources and things that I can do with you? Or are we going to be dealing with this cycle over and over and over again? It may change how, I don't know, coaches attached to particular pitchers in that way.
Yeah. In conclusion, August 8th and 9th, we'll get really into all of the up and coming conversations at Pitch Talk. Yes, but that's what Pitch Talk is about. So if you want to, the purpose of why we hold and this wasn't intentional. I didn't pick this question to pitch this, but the reason that we hold Pitch Talk is and the types of people who speak and the conversations we're having is about whether these up and coming conversations, whether the ways that we can keep advancing, pitcher health, pitcher performance, ultimately in the effort to continue to grow our game. But I think, that all of the conversations will in some way be around different sort of, pushing the boundaries on what we're doing in the pitching space from a development, performance, all of that standpoint. So come to Rosemont, August 8th and 9th. Go to our website. You can buy tickets now.
Be there, be square. Yep.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you guys for another great episode. Subscribe, share this episode, everything you can to get the word out. Obviously, it helps us get all of these great messages out, and we appreciate it. And until next week.